Good morning and a warm welcome to everybody on the webinar today. I see that more people are still coming in. um, let's get started in the meantime with some of the basics. So today's webinar is Untangling Organizations for Cloud and DevOps, being brought to you today by Swift Kanban from Digite and Polodis. So let's look at what the agenda for the day is, or for the session. We'll start with a few introductions. I'll give you a quick introduction to Digite Swift Kanban, and then I'll hand over the session to today's speakers. Jeremy Pullen is the main speaker, and he's being helped by Rob Gordick. And then at the end, we'll hopefully have a good Q&A session. Just some housekeeping: the webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you after this webinar is completed within a couple of days. We will take the questions via the Q&A box that you should see on the right-hand side of your screens. Go ahead and ask the questions anytime, and we will take as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's get started. So I have Jeremy Pullen today. He's the CEO of Polodis, and he's going to be our main speaker. Rob Gordick is organizational coach, and I happen to have a picture here which is going to look slightly different from how he does. He went through a little bit of a change of appearance in the last couple of weeks. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm a co-founder and senior vice president of marketing at Digite, and I'm going to be your host, and I'll be handling the Q&A at the end. Just to give you a little bit more information, Jeremy has been in the DevOps strategy and coaching for the longest time. He's had senior leadership roles at Cisco, Honeywell, and other companies, and has worked in a variety of the verticals: fintech, retail, telecom, healthcare, and IoT. Still actively coding, and his fun fact: he collects antique cameras and suitcases. Jeremy, I need to get a look at those cameras sometime soon. We have Rob Gordick. Rob is an organizational architect, DevOps transformation coach, community volunteer, speaker, and writer, and it's a great bunch of pictures here. His roots are in BizTech alignment and strategy, scale agility, financial services, and other verticals that he's worked with. And fun fact, he's played college water polo. I think one of the toughest sports that I know. My daughter used to try to compete for when she was in high school. So I'm sure some very strong abs, Rob.
Not anymore.
All right. So before I hand over the mic to Jeremy, just a quick overview of Digite. Have you been a pioneer in the web-based collaborative production solutions for distributed teams, remote teams, and very interesting time that we live in currently, where our tools are helping all kinds of teams around the world collaborate and work together. We are headquartered in Cupertino, California. Right here in the background, we have the Apple, the spacecraft headquarters that they have. We have nearly 1 million users of our tools all around the world. And our products cover Lean Kanban, Agile ALM, project portfolio management, and so some of the main tooling that we have there is Swift Kanban and Swifties, which support the Scrum, Kanban, safe methods for organizations that are involved in agile transformation initiatives. Just a quick look at the Swift Kanban tool. We have the ability to sort of visualize your entire value stream from concept to deployment, and so therefore very useful in terms of implementing DevOps, and most of our customers are involved in that. We also have, of course, other use cases for that. We have a very strong portfolio management capability, which allows you to do portfolio management, risk tracking, risk planning, and what we call enterprise services planning, which is part of the Kanban body of knowledge. Very strong analytics support as well. And in addition, we integrate with a variety of different ALM and software engineering tools for automating your CI/CD pipeline, and just having an overall track of your overall dev activity. Just a quick last slide on some of the customers that we have. And as you can see, we have some very well-known names, as well as variety of different companies from high tech to other industries as well. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the session to Jeremy. Jeremy, a very warm welcome, and thank you for the session today.
Mahesh, thank you very much. And just an audio check, let me know if you can't hear me, but, and I'm sharing my screen. It's really great to talk to you, everyone today. Mahesh, thanks for the great introduction and the opportunity to share this with all of your stakeholders and customers. So what we're going to be talking about today is this idea that technology and transformation go hand in hand in some way. And so what many organizations feel as they move to DevOps, cloud, and artificial intelligence is this stress that they can't really explain. And we think we know why, and we'd like to talk about that today. So what we're going to discuss is what competition looks like in the age of software, what the tangled wires of technology and organizations start looking like as that happens. We'll cover a playbook for rewiring the organization in a way that doesn't kill the organization in the process. We'll cover a case study and then we'll be done. So just to set the stage, from 1960 until 2001, technology and software was primarily used as a way to optimize the current business. So IT was really as the cost center there, and that was a great purpose. It did a lot of valuable things. But around 2001, technology matured and organizations matured to the point where there's this shift. And instead of using technology as just a way to optimize, this nomenclature is from Jeffrey Moore, the technology started shifting to being a system of engagement. So the focus was on differentiation with technology at the center of your business strategy instead of technology being on the edge. And that really has just resulted in just one of many waves of technology and innovation that have shifted from that cost focused and optimization focus to differentiation in a number of ways. Systems of intelligence with analytics and AI. And this isn't the only wave, there are many more coming. And what's funny is that the failure to neutralize competitors, not only from a marketplace perspective, but also how you organize your business strategy, can really end up being drastic, devastating to your business. And the Blockbuster example here is Blockbuster was online before Netflix was. Blockbuster had video streaming, had so many things before Netflix, but the internal way that Netflix organized, our hypothesis is, had a lot to do with how Blockbuster did not ultimately win in that particular war. And so the outdated organizational structures are really then unable to leverage the new technology that you develop. And so you have this internal inertia that you have to work through. And so understanding how internally your organization leverages technology is key to making this transition. And a key concept here is this idea of service-oriented architecture being embedded in your organizational structure. So that means your people and your architecture are aligned. And that means that the technology people and the non-technology people have to learn to talk a common language. Starting around 2009, let's go here. So really what this is a playbook to get you unstuck safely. You don't need to go through a near-death experience with your business, but the key assumption of the rest of this deck is that you're open to the idea that software isn't just a way to let those other guys optimize the way you run your business, but it's really a differentiator for the entire company. A lot of people have talked through this in different ways, and even more than I can put on this screen. And a lot of folks use the terms project to product to talk about this. Now, I can't say the problem is truly completely solved, but I can say there's a lot of prior art here, and we're not going to try and reinvent that wheel. A few key elements of that strategy is that the enterprise is a set of connected businesses or business products or services. So human resources is a service, sales is a service, IT and operations our services, but they also provide and are part of the services of HR and sales and others. So there's this different relationship that we have to understand. And that management's job is about the balanced funding of all these services, not just the customer facing ones, but the internal ones as well, and finding what the right balance is. And it's not a one-time decision, it's a constant fine-tuning process. One of the key challenges in this is that our disconnection between architecture, execution, and organization ends up getting in the way and prevents us from differentiating at a business level, as we covered before. And so one of the key things we need to do is unify our architecture and services into a clear domain model. And we're going to get into some more of that later. The US Air Force has their picture of this. Your picture is going to look different. And don't copy this. This is the example we're going to use the rest of the time. But what's missing in this is the people. So where exactly are the people in this? And so now Rob's going to talk through a new version of that story we just told, where you see the people and how they're really deeply embedded in that entire transition from 1960 to 21 of software being a different optimizer to being a differentiator. And so back to the project to product, we're not reinventing the wheel. What we're focusing on is what is that dynamic between architecture and organization? And that's going to be the focus of the rest of our talk today. Rob?
Thanks, Jeremy. So when we talk about service, it first starts with people, right? We were citing some authors that had a focus in that space. We have another access, Jeremy, if you don't mind. There we go. So we have the people part of the equation of a service. We have those that provide the capability. We have those that consume the service. And then there's the interactions in between. Now let's go ahead as we scale the business, and we need to have technology to augment or to improve performance, availability, scalability. You can see that the interactions mushroom in size, and that everything together becomes a part of the service. It is not just the outcomes, it is not just what's in production. You have to think of the whole value chain. This adds more and more complexity, and that I want everyone to be very clear here. Every company is a software company. Every company is a software company, and software imposes a certain flow to the work. It is the way it's done. And we have to have the entire value stream, that entire chain has to be knowledgeable and understand how we can do this to get the most out of it. We can break this down into 4 spaces. There's the build, the deploy, the run, and the decide. That is it. And at every step of the value chain, we need to be contextually aware and have a doctrine, a way of doing work that has the goal of the customer in mind. It is not just my responsibility what I do with blinders on. I have to have the whole value chain in understanding. The weakest link on any service defines the service level. So when we talk about the non-functional requirements, the scalability, availability, reliability, performance, all of these points, whichever point on these 4 areas hits the low bar, that really is going to define the entire service. And so again, having that understanding across all steps is really important. You wouldn't want to have one group that's doing astronomically well, only to be held back because there's other steps that aren't meeting that bar, that are not at that level. You want to make sure that there's total understanding. Most of those businesses, those services start as just a simple interaction. If we go back, like say to the 1960s, and I'm a sales rep, I'm working with my customer. I get on the telephone. The telephone's my technology. My notepad and my pen, that's my technology, but it's inefficient. We zoom forward into the 90s. I got now Excel or a spreadsheet, and now I buy that tool, right? I'm trying to make myself more effective. Zoom forward even more, where now I have a CRM tool. I have some developers. They're implementing a centralized way to get standards and optimizations further improved. I'm starting to get more economies of scale. I can have more sales reps, all talking the same way, behaving the same way, getting more benefits. I scale it even more with new capabilities, but it's adding now complexity. And now I have to have ability to be able to deploy faster and faster until we get to the present day, where we have, and even the CI/CD is crucial. It's an opportunity to further mature that pipeline, the processes, so that we can go to production on a daily basis and an inter-day basis. Next slide, please. And then we want to, and that, what once was just a focus on scaling optimization, now we're in a day where we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to keep the scaling of the business and keeping economies of scale there, but now we have a new opportunity. The opportunity is on the customer side. I want the customer to be treated like an individual with their individual needs while maintaining scalability. This is key to this day and age of software. Every company is a software company. Let's take it even one step further, where we take commodities of interactions between people to people and we try to see where can we digitize it? Where can we have even further scaling? I cannot scale human beings fastly and effectively as I can, like say, an Amazon, where we're having digitization straight to and examining how they use the software and automating and providing AI, which is giving us insights on the behavior on that interaction. And so we're seeing that relationship of human to human is now becoming more of a technology-driven interaction. So, and this drives OpEx and CapEx shifts as well, where we had a shift when it was from focus on the run, we have to now focus on how does our CapEx and OpEx spend on the entire delivery chain, the entire value chain. And again, that requires understanding. Companies are focused more on checking the balances of CapEx, OpEx on an aggregate model, but not on the horizontal value chain model. And so you have to be intentional on your spend in order to hit your company goals and your objectives. Our focus, again, management's focus on the service levels versus budget, it must be driven by the strategy. And this is an important part. This is what leadership is about, to have that, to be able to define these services and have that portfolio of services to see how this differentiates your company, and to be able to manage those cost outlays where we have keep the light on budgets that are running out of control, and being able to have strategic initiatives that will help bring down those operational costs, so that we can focus more on the cool stuff, the CapEx stuff, which is paramount. And usually you get, if you don't manage that, then you get held captive to your own, the own smells. We call them smells here at Pelotas, within managing of service delivery. Next slide, please. So what ends up happening without that understanding, you can see this is kind of, we've seen this before. Everyone probably out there has seen this before, where you don't have clarity or understanding of the entire service, and we have these interactions that are loosely organized, and they don't have the goals, the target states, the next steps. When we go to adding more people to these equations, it becomes incoherent. The operating architecture, the poor customer service. What ends up happening is we end up focusing just on our domains. The organizational designs almost handcuff us. We hear about Conway's law. Conway's law is there's wastes that now happen between groups, between teams, and they're losing sight of the fact that the goal is the big C customer at the end. That's the goal. And having an organization structure which best meets those needs and understands how we deliver those needs is paramount. It's a great opportunity for a lot of companies to consider shifting, because as we have so many individuals that are responsible in delivering great services, those roles can be inconsistent when applied to the value chain. And that just exasperates, you might have one group that's doing great, but when you have, the long pole in the tent, that'll hold you back. That's what's going to hold you back, and it'll exasperate poor delivery when there's not an understanding. Maybe there's some gaps, maybe there's some overlaps in the services that the various roles provide. Jeremy, I'm curious, what do you think? How would this affect the enterprise at scale if you continue just to scale this way?
Well, it just creates a lot of confusion. You don't know how to budget, and everybody gets frustrated because they're trying to get work done, and they're stepping on each other's toes. So there's a lot of emotions and a lot of cultural impact from this. Rob?
So with this in mind, what we have to do is we have to take more of if you don't mind, the next slide, looking to how this goes to I cited the gaps and the overlaps, and that causes just more chaos in the inefficiencies, and we lose sight again. We focus on our responsibilities and what we are hired to do, but that is not what we're hired to do. What we're hired to do is the goal of serving our customer.
So this chaos, when you multiply it across the enterprise, just it really slows you down. And so at this point, you might be thinking this is really going to be painful to fix. And I can't promise there won't be some pain here, but what we can say is there is a way out. And so what we're going to be talking about next is an approach to how we want to handle this, or how we could handle this to make it better. So let's talk about a playbook to work through these issues. First of all, start with a challenge. We'll talk about that in a second. Then we'll map our strategy, map our organization to that strategy, establish our organizational intent of where we're going, and then let the organization itself grow the architecture. And that's a lot different than the technology first approach, where you build the architecture and then reorganize around it. This is an organic model that allows you to let your organization be the one that drives it. So when we talk about starting with a challenge, we really have to understand what are our unmet needs, both for our customer and within the company. And if there isn't something that we consider to be maybe not broken, it often is broken, but if there's not agreement on that there's something that needs to change in the first place, there really isn't anything else to stand on. So we have to start with a current understanding and situational awareness. So often the way to do that is Wordly maps. You can build enterprise domain models, or your enterprise architects, or you may not have those. Someone within you and your organization can figure out where you're headed. Using Wordly maps is a great way to not just be technology focused, but actually look at your business strategy and map your business strategy and technology together. And really encourage you to learn how to do that, and we can help with that. The next part is we want to be able to map the organization into the strategy as we articulate that strategy. So don't jump to a RACI. You know, the nomenclature of responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed is good. It's not something that we're saying not to do ever. It's just that it's premature. You don't have an idea of what your strategy and how that maps organizationally. So you're just not ready for it yet. So the thing that you need to do is map that strategy into the build, deploy, run, and decide responsibilities. And so step one is you really want to be able to understand your current organizational boundaries. And this isn't a right or wrong discussion. You know, you may be in one organization where it's really siloed across build, deploy, and run. You may be somewhere else where it's not. Or you may have a mix like we have in this picture. It doesn't really matter. Draw the current reality, not your aspiration. So data analytics, security, architecture, IT infrastructure, all of these different responsibilities in the organization need to be clear what they currently are, because then from there we can understand the pain and the impact on the culture itself. We can understand the people and what the stress is that they're feeling, and we can also see the new territories within the organization that are coming from this new architecture and strategy. And that territory creates its own stress, because now you have people saying, I want to do that, and then someone else says, no, I want to. And it comes from their different perspectives on what they should own, what they do own, as well as compliance issues that people may be aware of or not. So we want to use that as a way to start meaningful conversations about what to change. Those meaningful conversations are going to start revealing to us some ways to resolve that. And what we do is we can establish some long-term intentions for healthy growth. And these growth areas don't exist yet. You know, on the previous slide, there were gaps. Guess what? In this picture, there's still gaps. But guess what? People build technology. And so you have to figure out who are the human beings that are going to be best aligned with the current organizational roles to go build the technology, adopt new processes and tools. The people come first, and then the technology comes from it. So building out this organizational map is really key to going on this journey. So this isn't a picture of best practice. You know, this particular example isn't for you to say, well, I need a big bright line between deploy and run. That must be the best way to do it. That's not the message here. The message is understand current state, and here's a way to draw a transition path in that state where everybody's clear on what the transition is. And I'm going to show you an example in a second where we actually cross that line of the compliance boundary, but we can talk about it and make sure we're doing it all together in a way that that has agreement instead of creating organizational clashes. So here's a case study. We have 5,000 hosts at a company that we've moved to AWS. We have 2,000 in a data center. Pick your industry and start with, and let's assume that we've already talked about what the challenges are and we've mapped our strategy. Again, we can't cover Wordly maps and everything in this webinar, but that's the kind of thing that we do help with. So let's assume that's already been done, and let's use this build, deploy, run, decide mapped onto the enterprise technology strategy as a way to understand where we are. So here's where we are today. We've got an application development team that's doing deployment onto static hosts in production. We have about 2,000 static hosts in the data center, and guess what? We have 5,000 hosts in AWS. They're still static. So we're actually not gaining anything from that potentially, because let's say we took a lift and shift type of approach. It's not, you might not like it, but it is what it is. So we also have IT and infrastructure doing manual host upgrades and patching, and a security team that most of the time is left to pick up the pieces. So let's map out the gaps. So we have big gaps in build and deploy and observability. We have big gaps in service mesh, in deploy, deployment containers, etc. So let's figure out who should own these things. And again, this is not a question of there's a perfect answer that I can tell you without knowing your organization. But what we can do is we can say, let's figure out for your organization what the right mapping is at the moment. But then let's establish organizational intent of who needs to grow into this ownership and create a path for that growth. So now we didn't have anybody in security engineering. We did have a group that could take over deployment engineering, and guess what? They've crossed that compliance boundary into the run space. And we have network engineering has been simplified, so now we've got one organization owning AWS in our data centers. We've outsourced to AWS, and so this again is establishing ownership and intent, even if the reality hasn't happened yet. And now we can start setting clear goals. Before, we had no way to set goals. Now we can have, one part of the organization responsible for taking the data center from 2,000 to 0 hosts. But let's be careful there. Maybe we actually need auto scaling. Now we can again set goals around who owns what in terms of organizational capabilities. And that allows us to chart a path. We can create these goals and say, we need a retirement plan for these things. We need a container repository. We can map our technology strategy and roadmap once we have the organizational map. I would challenge you to create a roadmap like this without having the org map first. So in summary, what we have is an environment where we've got competition that is just continuing to ramp up through waves of software, and this competition is putting pressure on organizations from the outside and pressure in the inside, causing this big tangle where there's not clarity of responsibilities or architecture within the technology and organizations, and they are intrinsically tied together. You cannot separate them, and if you do, you'll get in trouble. We shared a playbook and we went through a case study. And just to go over the playbook again, it's start with a challenge, map your strategy, map your organization onto that, establish your organizational intent, and let your organization grow the architecture that you want to grow towards. Instead of taking a technology-centric approach, take an organizational centric approach. So with that, it's time for Q&A. Mahesh?
All right. Excellent session, Jeremy and Rob. And so let's get started with Q&A. Folks who are on the webinar, feel free to ask a question or using the Q&A questions panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen. Let me start with a question that we were discussing a little bit earlier in our previous session. So you provided a great playbook, and you provided the sort of methodology for taking this transition. Typically, at what scale do you see this being applied? Do you see a sort of single service line, single business unit, entire enterprise take it up? What has been your experience in terms of applying this playbook at what scale?
I've seen it applied at multiple scales, everything from a small department, a single team, all the way up to organizations of 300 to 1,000 people. The key is that many people try to take a technology-centric approach, and they're completely blind to the way the organization is laid out, and they don't even know how to find the people to have meaningful conversation with. And so it really begins with that idea of find the people who are willing to look at what the current challenge is and find that area of agreement, rather than just being a bull in a china shop, unless you have that organizational authority, but then do it in a healthy way. Right. And so even if you're the one in charge, create healthy conversations by establishing that common organizational intent. because otherwise it just becomes chaos, and it creates an unhealthy culture.
Yeah, I have to echo exactly what Jeremy said. I've seen it both ways. It really does boil down to having leadership that has the will and the authority to be able to do such a monumental task. But the opportunities and the rewards are fantastic. And to be able to have that, call to action, the challenge, create the challenge. I want to deliver better, stronger, faster for my customer. I want to do it with more frugality and cost effectiveness in order to meet those needs, in order to get rid of those pains. I've seen it both ways. I've seen it done on a department scale. I've seen it done on the organizational scale.
And the other question that I have to ask, as a sort of typical next question that comes to most leadership, because it's all about planning and budgeting for taking up a project like this, is typically what's been your experience in terms of how long will it take for a take any kind of size of an organization? How long does it take for them to transition from where they are today to have, let's say, one service line fully sort of up and running?
Well, there are a lot of assumptions that we can make that we shouldn't make in terms of how to sequence this.
Of course.
It really becomes a question of, we need to use our maps for situational awareness to know what the right next step is. And many people jump into a strategy of how they execute without a strategy for how they're aware of the problem. And so in this playbook, really that step one of map your strategy and then mapping that onto your organization is going to show you the path. And the question of how long it takes is very dependent on that. What we can, though, assume is that this is not a question of a single hit it and forget it type of program. What this is this is a new operating model for how you run your business.
Yeah.
And
Paradigm
that
shift.
operating model requires not only your technology organization, but also your business functions to be engaged. And if I want to, we used an example that had a lot of technology components, but we would have, and if we had more time, we would have done the same thing, looking at business functions with very little IT in the picture. And it's the same picture. We're really looking at how the architecture and the business capability map together. And we're looking at how that's going to create value for our customers, and it's going to move the needle on organizational delivery.
The only thing I could add to that is I'm a big fan of, like, say, Joshua Karievsky with modern agility. There's this concept of making people amazing, and that you have to have almost like this doctrine. You have to have this mindset before you take on, especially very large transformations. You have to have that North Star of, this is, we're going to have that contextual awareness of the customer. If you had no contextual awareness, you wouldn't know what improvement means. You have no bearing. You have no way to do comparison. So you have to have contextual awareness. You have to have that desire to make the customer amazing, to make other departments on the value chain amazing. Your goal is not to make your department good. Your goal is to make the value chain good. That's a culture change for some companies. And so typically, Jeremy and I, what we face is that you want to go straight into, okay, let's go ahead and transform. Yeah, you're not there yet. You got to first create the culture so that we can do the transform. But different companies, you'll always find different companies are always going to be at different stages in those states.
And let me tease out a really cool insight from what Rob just said, and that is that the big expensive transformations are often the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
What we're talking about in this deck is that the transformation, since it's a journey, you don't need to take all your money and invest it at once. Instead, you need to partner with the right people to help you go along the journey, and then you can spend a lot less money up front and spread it out to make sure that it's effective over time.
Yeah.
Not only is that a better use of money, but it also makes you more accountable to the customer and establishes your credibility as a leader in your organization, so you don't have to take this big upfront risk.
Yeah, I would only add too is as you're doing this, you're constantly thinking, how can I get better for less? How can I get better for less? How can I have, twice the output in half the time? That's always kind of where we're thinking. But that's a cultural change. It's not a consultant that comes in that tells you, oh, you need to be doing this. It's the client that needs to be telling the consultants, I want to get better. Right? And that's typically the first fight.
Yeah. In fact, so let's take a couple of questions which are kind of related that came from the audience, and I'm going to paraphrase them and ask a composite question that typically the DevOps initiatives are part of a larger agile transformation type of a effort that the organization is doing. And it doesn't matter whether it's a scaled agile implementation or Scrum or Kanban or whatever be the method that they've selected, but it goes hand in hand with that, where there is a lot of focus on organizational change management, and there is of course the focus on the methodology that the framework that you selected imposes on you, or at least is supposed to impose on you. How does the playbook that you have described here, how does that play well into some of these sort of known agile transformation constructs, SAFe or a Kanban or other? How do they play together? Does it sound like another methodology to be remembered now or implemented, or does it dovetail with whatever the organization is already doing?
So what's
Jeremy?
interesting is many clients that I see have 4 or 5 transformations going on at once. They have a data and analytics transformation. They have a DevOps transformation. They have an agile transformation. They have a digital transformation. They have an AI transformation, and they are all disjointed. And guess what they've done? They've just taken all these budgets and they've killed all these transformations because they don't have enough money to invest in any of them sufficiently. And they've created this chaos between all these different people who are trying to lead these different transformations at the same time. Yeah. So what this playbook gives you is a way to build one strategy to rule the corporate, the whole company, to guide the whole company, and to then make sense of where does it make sense for us to do DevOps? Where does it make sense for us to do Agile? Where does it make sense for us to do all these technologies? But it helps us tie them together into one cohesive picture. Right. And then that's where you can then choose where to apply different tools and techniques. Yeah. So that's where this fits, is it helps set the right stage, because the last thing you want to do is have all these transformations going on at once in a disjointed way.
Yeah, I would just add, as a SAFe instructor, right? So I teach SAFe and I teach Kanban XP. Yeah, I have a lot of experience in these spaces. Anytime I see a company going after multiple transformations all at once, I'm going to tell you straight, only one's going to work. Once you have multiple goals all going on at the same time, I call it death by Southern hospitality. That's what I'm in Atlanta here. So in the South, it's about, I want to meet all these needs. I have all these needs, but because I didn't prioritize, and that's the problem, that we need to have prioritization and focus. Let's do one thing, do it well. Let's do one transformation, do it well. Yeah, that's all I have to add to that.
Yeah. And as a follow-up to that, there's a question: how would you go about convincing stubborn leadership in this way, that this is the way forward? And I would add to that, typically, who does one pitch to? Is it the CIO? Is it somebody else that's sort of driving this? But let's take the first part of the question. How do you go about convincing stubborn leadership, which is always, of course, a struggle for any transformational effort?
So what's interesting here is it really comes down to, what does leadership mean to you? Because leadership is what you have to employ to convince stubborn leadership. And so what is your stance as a leader in this entire conversation? And so the first question has to be, what is my leadership approach? And am I going to go in and tell them what's wrong and what to do about it? Or am I going to have a strategy for how I both listen to them and help them to see things that they don't already see?
Yeah.
And so it really begins with that. Step one, can we understand, back to the playbook, what is the challenge that's compelling? And then from there, can we build together with a group of people who are willing to participate in conversation in a meaningful way, a mapping out of where you are strategically and organizationally in order to address that challenge? Ideally, the leader that you're trying to convince is part of that conversation. They're going on that journey with you. And if they're not willing to participate in that conversation, then you may have a challenge with them not seeing that the challenge exists in the first place. So that goes right back to the playbook. You have to identify a challenge that's compelling. And I can tell you, most CIOs' top concern is budget. Budget has gone through the roof in many organizations, and it's directly tied to this deck, where when Rob went through the shift from run to the left to deploy and build, that's a major shift in budget in OpEx and CapEx that especially non-technical leaders don't really know why.
Yeah.
Because they haven't seen that transition that we went through today.
Yeah.
And so
I've never seen a company that goes to cloud, they be effective as a strategy to go to cloud to reduce cost. It's never happened, ever. Cost has always gone up when I go to cloud. And so the better question is, how do I offset that increased cost that is necessary? Remember I was talking about scaling the business? How can I scale revenue so that it pays for that increase in cost?
And I think presenting the revenue picture first, and then talking about the impact on the cost side. Absolutely, very well said. One interesting question that is come in, and we might add some additional points to it. But the question was, any suggestions for it says for non-IT organizations, but I think it applies to any kind of an organization where now things are in this current environment looking very different from a very centralized office work type of a environment to a work from home concept where everybody is even more distributed than they were before. Is there any impact of the current environment in terms of how we go about implementing DevOps?
Rob, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So DevOps, remember, DevOps is not CI/CD. DevOps is people and culture. DevOps is understanding every aspect of build, deploy, run, all the decision frameworks that are on top of that. And it's about having joint ownership, joint desire to get better at all of that together. You can't just be a tester and all I do is I'm in the build space and maybe a little bit in deploy, right? That isn't the goal. The goal is I need to get this value to the customer. Once you change that, today's help, we're having some problems and run. Well, I'm a tester. Maybe that tester should be involved to get some more empathy of what the run team is challenged with. Is there something we can do in testing that can help run team? Yeah. I don't know if that addresses it well enough, but Jeremy, what do you got?
Well, I think COVID is maybe being overblown in its impact on DevOps. Because if you really look at it, it's about being intentional about communicating with people that you may not have in your normal path of interaction. And so you have to be intentional about doing that. And in fact, what I'm seeing is that for some organizations, the shift to remote work is helping with that because people are more accessible through chat and other
Yeah,
technologies.
I've seen that. I've seen
Uh,
that.
and so sometimes it's helping DevOps, it's not hurting it because it removes some of the barriers to communication because everybody's on the same medium.
I've noticed too that, you know, with COVID, that the interactions in this medium, they're more purposeful. They're really focused, and because you want to make sure you're not having just meetings for meeting's sake. I have seen teams where they just have, you know, all the video bubbles. That team stays up and running all day long, and it's as if they're in the same room.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's very effective. And I see that you have the testers and maybe a person from Run, you know, they're on mute, they're focused on doing operational things, but they're available. They're right there. I can click on them. And I've seen that before too.
And I think I've seen one other thing, which is that I think more than ever, leadership, who's always a little shy of using technology, I think they are now more comfortable, you know, getting on a video meeting and being able to talk to people far more than they were inclined to do so earlier. So their own use of technology to be in touch with their leadership team as well as with the organization as such has, I think, improved. Because they are forced in this situation.
Yeah.
So one other question that's come in is, so DevOps and IT ops in particular, they are challenged with committing to and then of course meeting those service level objectives, SLAs. And there was a couple of slides that referred to SLAs in your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about how does the approach that you described, how does it help in setting up or setting more realistic SLAs and then of course meeting them? What's your experience there?
Can I take this one, Jeremy?
Go ahead.
I love setting a hypothesis-driven development type of culture. I like to create a learning culture that has purpose, that our goal, we want to improve in this space. But when we have SLAs, and think of it this way, it's like all the non-functional requirements. We used to call them non-functional requirements back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then they became enablers. And safe, they're the red boxes or the blue boxes. These are the red boxes. These are enabling things. I wanted scalability, reliability, availability, security, all the itties. When we have a organizational focus, in I'm losing my train of thought here. Jeremy, help me. Throw me a lifeline.
Okay, so really all SLAs are there for a purpose.
Needed.
But the problem is if we don't know where to measure them from, then they're meaningless.
Yes.
And so step one is understanding, okay, what is even the boundary of the SLA within build, deploy, or run? And we have different ways of working in build, deploy, and run that are fundamentally incompatible that we have to manage some way. Because if you have a production environment that's down, you need to respond in 30 seconds. Whereas if you have new code that you need to do infrastructure automation, that may be 4 hours to 4 weeks of work that needs to be done, and it's a completely different mindset, and you end up needing to establish SLAs that match the type of work that needs to be done, and then be fair to the people doing the work. Because if you have one person in 30-second response mode, they don't have the presence of mind to spend a lot of time thinking through a tough problem. So you have to have a strategy for both having collaboration between the fast and slow twitch muscles of your organization, while also letting those fast and slow twitch mechanisms work effectively. Otherwise, you're just yanking someone back and forth between two ways of working. And so there are tons of strategies for doing that. Everything from the way that end-to-end DevOps team are organized to some organizations doing team separation between those functions. And we're not here to preach one of those gospels, but what we are here is to say, be clear on what your strategy is and how you're managing those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the purpose is, are you working on bleeding edge technology, and this is a proof of concept, and think of yourself as more like a pioneer. And in that pioneer space, I really want to have fast deployments into this test area of production that only a small group of people are in there. And I want to manage it and support it really kind of more myself amongst a small group of, big guns, they're grinding away at this. Or is it that I'm more of like a settler's mindset, not a pioneer, a settler's mindset, where we already have an established capability, and now what we want to do is we want to make sure it's reliable for the city, it's reliable for I want to keep the utilities up and running. It's a different type of focus on those non-functional requirements, different SLAs of more performance, availability, reliability, wherein the cutting edge team, the one that are doing all the fun, cool stuff, maybe with new AI or something like that, their non-functional requirements are going to be maybe about a more honed and towards build and deploys for fast feedback loops and understanding, and to enable that. So like the logging capability, right? Logging is not is important to the pioneer on feedback loops of how the behavior of the customers using their software, whereas logging has a different purpose in the settlers type of mentality, where they're trying to evaluate why did the system go down? Traceability. It's so you have to contextually, you have to understand your tribe, your team, and hopefully that helps. I was a little bit of a ramble.
No, I think that's a great way to look at, how do you even establish the framework for thinking about SLAs. One related question about this. So, and we're coming to the end of our session, so maybe the last couple of questions. But the first one is about organizational maturity. Every framework, whether it's agile, we heard about it back in the days of CMMI and so on and so forth. But there is always this question of organizational maturity. Do you see, or do you have some suggestions on letting people assess themselves? Are they ready to do this? Is there a point in time in their own evolution or transition or transformation that they say, okay, we are ready to do this?
So yes, and two things. One is that many of the maturity models are very technical, practice focused, but I'm much more of a fan of a cultural maturity viewpoint.
Yeah.
And that is, we start with a culture at the bottom of the maturity scale that is completely individually focused. It's all about me and my own survival. But as we grow into more of a team focus and how we can help each other, that's where we really start creating a lot of value. But that still isn't far enough. So we need to move into a customer focus and how we're serving the organization and how's the organization serving the customer. But then we want to be really disciplined and rigorous to know, are we really doing that and how do we know? So that's where we start incorporating metrics, KPIs, and other feedback loops to the point where really the goal ultimately as a most mature organization is able to both pivot and adapt to customer needs, predict the direction the market's going, and organize internally for those future challenges. So that's really what maturity is. And by the way, that's the Kanban maturity model. And it has nothing to do with Kanban per se. It's really about organizational and cultural maturity. And then how do we go and build a culture that does that? And that's where the Kanban coaching approach and methodology really has a lot of value.
Yeah, you have multiple things at work here. One is that leadership has to lead. I'm sorry, you can't be complicit. Leadership has to lead. You have to set the purpose, set the tone. This is why we're here, folks. We're enabling the business, and this is what it means to enable the business. These are the metrics that matter. And then once you set that tone, so now we talk about those maturity model. I'm not a fan of I used to be CMMI type of guy, and having those levels, am I a 1, am I a 2, do I want to be a 4? It's better to do self-assessment, to set the tone as that, okay, well, where are you on your journey? Where do we want to, what would the next level look like? Maybe, and remember, we're talking about culture change. This is paradigm shift. It's a little different. So when we say that we want to be DevOps focused, maybe the first level is, well, is your team even talking about DevOps? Do you talk about DevOps? Well, no, we're thinking about talking. We think about it. We've read a white paper, whatever. What's the next step? Well, we actually had a lunch and learn on DevOps, and it's starting to become, okay, that's cool. What's the next step? Well, we're actually engaging with operations, bringing them into our build, letting them be aware a little bit ahead of it. Or no, now they're official members of our teams, and that they can come and go, and they have a portal to get updates on our status and see what our needs are. But do you see how this is different than maturity model? Maturity model is it's like to meet a level 3, I have to do X, Y, and Z. It's check, check, check. In a culture maturity model, it's very different. I don't even like calling it a maturity model. This is where we are in our mindset. And this is what it would mean to be in the next level of mindset.
And the value here is not only for the people, but that's truly to enable customer-centric value. And that's what really is going to drive organizational growth.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to grow the business, then we've got to be growing the organization with it. And that's why all that cultural stuff is so important.
That was a great question.
Excellent. And again, there were a couple of questions that I will paraphrase and let you gentlemen have your closing thoughts as well. Is how do I get started? And so I thought I'd bring out the last slide, which of course gives you all on the webinar a way to get in touch with us. And obviously, one way to get started is to contact these fine gentlemen who have given us such a great session. But how do you get started? That's sort of the closing question. Quick thoughts on that from both of you, Jeremy and Rob.
So I'm going to go back to the playbook. Understand a challenge, number 1. Number 2, situational awareness of your strategy and your organization, and then have meaningful conversation and build organizational intent of where you want to go next. If you don't know where you are, you can't know where you're going to go. And without meaningful conversation with the people involved, then you can't move. So that's where you start.
Yeah. There's, again, the prerequisites, fostering that learning culture, right? And it's not learning for the sake of learning. It's not like you can go out and learn, hey, I want to learn, a new programming language or something like that. No, it's effective learning. It's about, I have a customer, they have these needs. What do I need to learn to better serve my customer? By creating this culture first, that's one of the big catalysts that will enable you to have bigger, bolder discussions, which what this talk was all about. This is about, we're talking about how can I adjust our roles and how we do towards what software development is. This is how software development is this way. And we need to make sure that organizations are structured in a way that best serves software delivery. Every company is a software company.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Jeremy and Rob, for a fascinating discussion on a complex topic. And I think hopefully you've given folks on the webinar today a really good approach to firstly just framing the problem and framing the overall org structure, if you will, in the way that they need to think about it. And then, of course, to get going in small steps in order to really and truly sort of implement DevOps in their organization with a culture and a people participation that is geared for success of the overall initiative. So thank you very much, and really appreciate you doing this webinar with us. And I really hope that we can continue this series and talk about other topics as well. And I think we have some other sort of value and material coming your way for all the organization, but we will talk more about that in our upcoming communications to the audience. So with that, thank you very much again. Have a great rest of the day. Jeremy and Rob, take care.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.